Gibraltar is a British overseas territory in the Mediterranean. Known affectionately as the Rock, it's a place of stark natural beauty, but it's also hugely strategically important. It's been fought over for centuries, and the Spanish have always seen it as a part of their country. Now residents of the Rock are afraid that if they get forgotten in the Brexit negotiations, they could find themselves in another battle, this time political, to keep Gibraltar British.
Spain lost Gibraltar by conquest, in right of conquest. The United Kingdom, British and Dutch Marines conquered Gibraltar in 1704. It was ceded by treaty to the British Crown in perpetuity, which means forevermore. And Spain wants it back, and has always wanted it back.
But this is not the first time that Spain have put pressure and made life hard for Gibraltar. In 1969, the Spanish dictator Francisco Franco closed the border, separating families and loved ones. With all eyes on what could happen to the border separating Northern Ireland and Ireland, people seem to be forgetting about the border between Spain and Gibraltar, the border between Britain and the European Union.
It made life very difficult in the sense that everybody else, when Christmas came, when birthdays came, could be with a whole family, whereas it was like a part of me was missing because all my Spanish cousins weren't around. So yeah, it was very hard.
The frontier opened in 1982. I was about 17 years old, so until then, we couldn't cross over to visit my auntie at her house and share experiences with her or my cousins. So in all honesty, it was quite sad and frustrating. Gibraltar was captured by the British fleet in 1704 during the War of the Spanish Succession. On the 4th of August that year, the Anglo-Dutch fleet took Gibraltar from the Spanish. Gibraltar was ceded to Britain under the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713. The border was peaceful until 1968, when a referendum was taken on whether the people of Gibraltar wanted to remain British or become Spanish. 44 people voted for Spanish sovereignty, and 12,762 voted to stay with Britain. Outraged by this, the then Spanish dictator Francisco Franco decided to close the border in an outrage towards this, severing all ties between Spain and the Rock.
Franco predicted Gibraltar was going to fall like a ripe fruit. That didn't happen. It had the opposite effect. His measures were completely counterproductive. And the irony is that the frontier gates were shut for longer by a democratic Spain than they had been shut by General Franco himself, who died in November 1975. So Spain has always used the border and the idea of coercion in order to try and recover the sovereignty of Gibraltar. They do not accept the argument that the people of Gibraltar exist, that we have been living here since 1704, and that we have rights. And their argument is very simple. I mean, under international law, we have the right to determine our own future, and that should be decided freely and democratically by the people of Gibraltar, not by anybody else.
Janine Norde was born in 1968, the year before the border was closed. With her mother being Spanish, that meant that she was separated from a lot of her family.
It was very difficult because obviously I was aware that they'd closed the border and my mother had lost contact with all her brothers and sisters. So I experienced through her the anxiety and the sadness of the separation, and also I knew I had cousins in Spain that I'd never met, so it was very hard.
On the other side of the border, Janine's cousin, Maria Angelines Revuelta, was also separated from her family. Yes, it made life hard, especially knowing that you've got close family around and you can't visit them. It wasn't like they were thousands of kilometers away. They were only a half an hour drive away from us.
I think the closure of the border is part of the reason why most Gibraltarians don't want to be Spanish, because we still remember the hardship that we went through. And also I think because we grew up with a closed border, culturally we were very different, because our culture developed separately to the Spanish culture, so there was no mixing. So that also has a lot to do with why Gibraltarians don't want to be Spanish, I think.
The border finally reopened in 1982 for pedestrians and in 1985 for vehicles. There was a lot of emotion as families and loved ones were able to reunite for the first time after years apart. I remember crying loads from happiness at the thought of having so many cousins that I'd never met before. We talked for hours. We had so much to say that I don't think we slept that night. We talked about how things were going on at school and our daily lives. We were catching up until the early hours of the morning. Even though their family was able to come together again, the two cousins feel they missed out on a lot of each other's lives. We lost many years. Of course, we could talk about our separate lives, but it is not the same as being with that person, experiencing and living your lives together. Our families were able to communicate and knew of one another through some letters and a few phone calls. But obviously, back then, it wasn't how it is now, where you can communicate through things like Skype. In those times, you either saw each other in person or you were limited to communicating through phone calls and letters. The people of Gibraltar are now worried that what happened in 1968 could happen again, 50 years later. Back in 2013, Spain insisted on imposing stringent checks at its border, leaving people queuing for up to 5 to 6 hours.
The border is a particular concern because, as you know, Spain closed the border completely from 1969 until 1982 when it opened for pedestrians, and 1985 when it opened for vehicles. And they've always used the border as a political weapon whenever they're not happy with anything that involves Gibraltar, normally by creating deliberate lengthy queues to cross in either direction.
Gibraltar were able to complain to the European Commission, who then sent inspectors to the border to check the way in which Spain were conducting the controls. They made a series of recommendations to Spain, such as for them to improve the physical infrastructure of the border and that they should not check every single person and every single car crossing in and out.
The point was, the border now works better than it did in 2013 when we had those lengthy delays. But the concern here is that once we lose the protection provided by European Union law, we will no longer be able to complain to the European Union or to the European Commission about the manner in which Spain is conducting the controls of the border. So once we lose a blanket of protection that EU law provides, we're not quite sure what is going to happen going forward. And that is why, in whatever relationship is agreed between the United Kingdom and the European Union, it's important that the border fluidity at Gibraltar is taken into account. Gibraltar did not vote to leave the European Union. We voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU.
Gibraltar saw the biggest Remain vote of all the voting areas. Only 823 members of the public voted Leave, and 19,322 members voted to Remain. Although Gibraltar would like to remain in the EU, it does not mean they will consider becoming Spanish.
Asking us to become part of Spain is as alien to us as asking us to become part of China or part of New Zealand. The reality is that the people of Gibraltar are a distinct population in their own right. In 1704, when the Anglo-Dutch force took Gibraltar, most of the Spanish population left and only about 40 people stayed behind. What you get after that is immigration coming into Gibraltar from different parts of Europe, particularly from Genoa in Italy, for example, from Malta and from other countries. The agglomeration of different nationalities in Gibraltar over 300 years has created the Gibraltarian that you have today and the distinct Gibraltarian identity. And under international law, because we are one of the 17 territories listed by the United Nations pending decolonization, it's very clear that the legal position is that the future of those territories, including ourselves, can only be freely and democratically decided by the people who live there, by the colonial people, and in this case, by the people of Gibraltar.
Gibraltar has been British for over 300 years, and its people are proud of their nationality. With Brexit negotiations entering a crucial phase, the people of Gibraltar are hoping that the border doesn't become the forgotten frontier.